A bow to the Buddha 3 times. First bow, second bow, and third bow. All right, please be seated. If you could please join your palms. Together we recite Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in hundreds of millions of eons. I now see and hear it, receive and uphold it, and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. All right. Okay, this is where we are in the Amida Sutra, in the nadir directions, and we've been talking about the meanings of the first Buddha, which is the Lion Buddha. And the Lion Buddha represents strength and confidence in propagating the truth. And in order for us to support something, we should believe in it and understand it. And in order for us to understand the truth, which the Dharma represents, there are 3 pillars in Buddhism, called the 3 jewels: the Buddha jewels, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewels. Right now, we're focusing on the Dharma jewels. We've been talking about the Dharma, and the Dharma has multiple meanings, such as reality, expositions, enlightenment, and so forth. So we've gone through all those definitions, and what I want to talk to, so here it is, reality, it means reality that the Buddha experienced, the expressions that the Buddha, in the Buddha's experience. The Dharma in general can mean the truth, the law, the principle, and a phenomenon, an idea or mental object in our mind or state of existence. And last time where we talked about conditionality, there are 2 types. The circular conditionality, where it fluctuates between the 2 opposites, such as happiness, unhappiness, good and bad, and so forth. And in the circular conditionality, which governs our life essentially, is described by the 12 links. And we talked about the 12 links consist of 3 categories: ignorance, karmic formation, and then in the present lives of the consciousness, name, form, 6 bases, contact, sensation, craving, clinking, and becoming. I'm just reviewing here what we talked about last time. And then the future life, of course, with that comes birth and then subsequently decay and death. What I want to talk about to you today is consciousness. Last time I described consciousness in a general sense. Let me pass through this. Okay, so consciousness is a broad definition, very broad word, and it can mean multiple things. In the terms of the 12 links, it means different than in terms of the 5 aggregates, and it's a little bit different from the mind-only study. So what we talked about last time was the consciousness in a general sense. Today I want to pick up on this a little bit to talk about consciousness from the 12 links perspective. The consciousness here is really the relinking of consciousness to the psychophysical process in the form of new life, because of this consciousness that it relinks from our past life to our present life. And let's go into explanation of Sangarisita from his work, What is the Dharma? And this is how he explains consciousness. Okay, consciousness here, it arises independent of karma formations. Karma formation here, volition, is really called the ego, because there's an egoistic drive to have something to enjoy something, that it creates this relinking of consciousness. So in this case, in the 12 links, it's not in a general sense, but in a very specific sense. And he calls it the relinking of consciousness, where it links our past life to our present life. It relinks the psyche to the psychophysical process in the form of a new life. We call it rebirth. So there are three factors that are necessary for conception of a human being. In his book, he writes, first of all, there needs to be a prospective mother who should be ready to conceive, so she's capable of conceiving this new life. And secondly, there needs to be sexual intercourse for that to happen. But this is maybe a generic explanation, because with technology, you can have new form, new life with technology. So a woman can still have a baby using technology to have a baby. But there needs to be a joint of a sperm and an egg in order for a vehicle to have, so that the consciousness can take part in. The third is that there must be something called being, ready to be reborn. So these are generally the three conditions for new life to form. The being here means the last moment of consciousness belonging to the previous existence. And in the mind-only study, or mind-only school, this is called the alaya, A-L-A-Y-A, consciousness, which is the eighth consciousness. And it's called the first one to come and the last one to leave. The first one to come into this life, and then this life, all the other senses have gone away, subsided, and it is the last one to leave. There are many debates about this, because there are schools who don't believe in the in-between, called a bottle. And like, for example, Theravada, they believe that once a person dies away, and the consciousness relinks immediately to the next life without any kind of interval in between death and rebirth. But other schools, like Tibetan or Mahayana, they believe that there is an intermediate state called the bottle. And the bottle is intermediate state, or called a spirit state, if you will. So this is open to debate. The more important issue here is that whether or not anyone may be said to be reborn at all, because of the no self doctrine, right, or the anatman. So in Buddhism, the concept of no self, so who exactly is reborn if there is no self? There's nobody to take part in that rebirth. So Buddhism offers a solution to this conundrum. So first of all, we should avoid the two extremes. Right? The two extremes. One extreme is that a person who is reborn in a new existence is the same as the person who was in the last existence. So it's the same Tom, Dick, or Harry, only that they are kitted out with a new body. So in other words, the soul, there's a permanent soul. The thinking of a permanent soul that doesn't change is only the body that changes. So that's one extreme that in Buddhism is taught to avoid. Simile here, metaphor here is that just like putting on a new set of clothes, you yourself are the same. You just put on a new set of clothes and you are now a different person. So that's one extreme. So it's the concept of the soul. The other extreme is that you must be essentially a different person in your next life. So you can't be the same. You have to be. This is a new existence. And this thinking here is that the influence or the conditioning exerted by the body on the psyche is so profound. In other words, your physical experience is so fundamental to your identity that you cannot be said to be the same person. So this leaves only alternatives. Either the person is the same or they are different. Those are two extremes. So there are two opposing schools surviving to this day. To illustrate this point a little bit further, one says that the cause and effect are identical. The so-called effect is produced, and all that has happened is that the cause has changed its form. For example, like an example is a lump of gold, which you can make different ornaments of it. You can make a ring, an earring, necklace, but it's the same gold. The only thing that the appearance of that gold has changed, but the intrinsic nature of that gold is still the same. That's one thinking. Or another example is ice and water. You have water and you form ice, and then you can change back to water. So water is liquid and ice is solid. So although they look different, but they are essentially the same. That's one thinking. That's one extreme. The other extreme is that the cause is one thing and the effect is quite another, like milk turning to curds, like butter, right? They're different. Milk and butter are different. So both of these extremes make the causation, the cause and effect, impossible. So Buddhists avoid this whole argument. So how Buddhism approaches this is that it establishes itself on conditionality. It does not ignore the fact that they're the same or different. Buddhism focuses on conditionality, not the cause nor the effect. So according to this principle, whether mental or material arises in dependence on is conditioned by or a complex of other phenomena. So in other words, one single entity cannot cause itself to become, but it has become because of different elements that have influenced and provide that conditions for that entity to come into being. So this relationship between the conditioned agents and the objects of conditioning cannot be described in terms of identity or in terms of difference. So Buddhism says why things happen? Well, because of conditions, not because it arises on its own. So applying this principle to the questions of rebirth, the independence of karma formations, remember the ego, of the last life, the consciousness arises. So our consciousness in this life, at the beginning of this life, is independent of past karma formations, meaning there is, in the past life, there was already a drive to have a life, to want to have something. So to ask if someone is the same or different from the person whose karma formation is besides the point. So in Buddhism says it's neither the same nor different. You cannot say you're different because there is a relinking, but then you cannot say it's the same person because you are not the same. And for example, I have a note for myself here. For example, in the past life, if you were like an ant, so that you had a consciousness of an ant, and then you pass on that life, and now you have this life as a human being, you don't have the characteristics of the ant. So you cannot say that you came from the ant because you don't have the characteristics of the ant. For example, like ants like sugar, like bread, crumbs of bread on the floor, but human people like money. But if you were to give ant $100 bills, the ants won't care. So your preferences, your likes, your characteristics in this life are not the same as before, but you cannot say you're completely different because there is a linking between the last life and this life. And so Buddhism avoids this whole same or different argument, those three extremes, but says conditions. Because of the conditions have come to fruition that it forces you to have a consciousness, to have an ego of a human being, as opposed to an ego, a consciousness of an animal or a heaven being. Okay. So the word reincarnation is not really appropriate to be used in Buddhism, because according to his book, reincarnation here is getting into a body again and again, and that assumes there is an unchanging soul, and which is not consistent with the Buddhist principle. So technically, it should be called becoming again, punabhavad, or again becoming or re-becoming, because we're becoming again, and we're neither the same nor different from the past. Okay, so essentially, in the consciousness, from the 12 links perspective, consciousness is the relinking of consciousness to the psychophysical body that we have. Okay, are there any questions, comments, and concerns so far? If you have questions, you can enable your microphone and ask. Okay, if not, I will move on to the next one. And I'll briefly describe here to differentiate the different aspect of consciousness, but I won't go into the details so much because we'll cover it differently, but I just don't want to digress too much. Another is the, in terms of consciousness, is the recognition that we talked about this last time. When your eyes, your sense organs, your eyes, your nose, your ears, when those sense organs interact with an external object, like your eyes, you see form, right? An object in front of you. Your ears, you hear sound. So the object of hearing is sound, and smell is scent. So the object of smelling is scent. So when your sense organs interact with those objects, you cause rise to consciousness, because the organs alone cannot sense. The organ is just like a camera. You have to process in order to see it. So your consciousness is what allows you to see. And because you have your eyes open doesn't mean that you can see. For example, we are at a table in an office, and we're looking around to see where the pencil is, right? And lo and behold, the pencil is right in front of us, but we just can't see it because we're at that point we don't have core attention of that object. And so although it's right in front of us, our eyes are open, but we cannot see it because there is no consciousness in that seeing. And so in terms of general recognition, that's what it means in terms of consciousness, as opposed to the 12 links where it's the relinking of consciousness. Okay? And then in the mind only, where in terms of mind, the consciousness is broken into 3 parts. In addition to the 5 senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue to taste, and your sensing, your body. You also have the 3 more consciousness, the types of consciousness. One is called sita, or the mind. That is your 6th consciousness. Your mind recognizes things. And for example, if I ring a bell, when you hear that sound, you know it's a bell. And when I say a cup, you can imagine the image of a cup, right, with some holding and with some handle. Or when I draw an object, although it's not the same, you recognize it. Or even without seeing it, you can recall, you can reimagine that sound, the smell, the taste. So that's the 6th sense. It allows you to recognize without, no, you can recognize it. And the 7th sense is the mano, or the ego, and that's our ego. which is attachment. It describes that attachment. Once you have an ego of a human, it attaches to the characteristics of a human. If you are a man, you have characteristics of a man, and so it's also a woman or a heaven being. They have different characteristics because of their ego. They are fixated on a certain characteristic of that being. And then the seventh sense is the alaya, and the alaya here is really the relinking consciousness that takes you from one life to the next. But then there is really, it's just the relinking. Okay, are there any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so the Dharma is really a precious gift that the Buddha has given us. The Buddha has given us the law of conditionality, the law of, which is the law of causality. The law of causality is cause and effect. Cause and effect, and it ignores conditions. Cause alone without condition would not have effect. Without the cause, but you have conditions without the cause, you will not have effect. So when it says conditionality is really fundamental, the reason is that it is really through conditions that you can have allow the cause to come into effect. So because of that this is the gift, because it allows us to grow and it allows us to feed the right conditions for the right kinds of results that we want. So this is very empowering because we are not fixated to this particular being. If we don't like what we have, we can provide the right conditions to grow. For example, if you are not happy with yourself financially, then the Buddha says giving the right conditions, the conditions of giving, allows you to have a better life, material life. Right? If you want health, then Buddha says to give the gift of fearlessness, to provide safety to others. When you are able to provide safety to others, you yourself will have, you will feel secure. And if you want to be more, to be smarter, want to be more intelligent, then you can give the gift of knowledge, share your knowledge, and enable others to be more capable. So this law of conditionality says that we can change our existence towards something better by giving it the right conditions. The Buddha has given us the gift of enlightenment, right? Worldly and spiritual liberation. Because of enlightenment, that we can see things very clearly. Enlightenment is like light in a dark room. In a dark room, you feel your way around and you know where you're going to be. Sometimes you're in the sixth realm. Sometimes you're down in the lower three realms, in the heavens or human realm. And you don't have control of that. But once you have if you're lucky, then you find yourself in a better life, in a heaven or a better human life, if you're lucky. But that's luck. But with enlightenment, it's like turning on a light in a dark room. You know exactly where the exit is, and you can take that exit without having to waste too much time, do trial and error. So that is the gift from the Buddha to us of enlightenment, is that he has achieved enlightenment and that he has given us hope that we ourselves can achieve enlightenment for ourselves, so that we can make the right decisions. We know the conditions for something better. So how much we benefit from learning Buddhism would depend on how much we appreciate and understand the reality that the Buddha has achieved. And what is this reality? Well, there are several components to this reality. The first reality that the Buddha in the Buddhist scriptures often indicate is dukkha. So let's take a look at that. Dukkha. Dukkha in Sanskrit it's called dukkha, and this is usually translated as suffering. But a better one, a better definition is really unsatisfactoriness. There is some insatisfaction in a state of being. And if we looked at the origin of the word dukkha, we can understand it a little bit better. Because when you translate dukkha into suffering, that sounds very positive, negative and very pessimistic. But you look at this, what it means here. A duk means anything that is not good, right? Either like bad, ill, wrong, out of place. And ka is connected with the Sanskrit word called chakra, which means will, the will. And dukkha is said to have a meaning as a ill-fitting wheel of a chariot. So you're on a chariot, a ride, and the wheels are they don't fit very well, and so your ride is going to be very bumpy, right? Your journey is not going to be very comfortable, and so you will never be at ease. So dukkha here is that you go through life, and there will always be bumps along that ride. Right? Either economic meltdown, terrorism, or in this case, we have the COVID-19 disease. So last year, everything was great, right? Financially, the market was up, and then all of a sudden, the market crashed because of the COVID-19 disease. So that is a bump that we didn't expect, and you can bet that after this bump, there's going to be in the future, there's going to be some smoothness in that ride, but there will also be more bumps in that ride. So the first, I have a note here that the three words that we have, the words of the central word, the form world, and the formless world, that the Buddha describes our existence of our universe, if you will. All these three words have their own unsatisfactoriness. For example, in the sensual world, let me make this a little bit bigger. In the sensual world, there are 8 kinds of miseries caused by physical and mental suffering, such as birth, old age, illness, death, and disappointment from your desires, your wishes, and conjoining with what you dislike, your jobs or your enemies, your foes, people at work, your co-workers you don't get along, but you have to work with them because of the paycheck that you have to continue to put up with that, or separation from loved ones. You don't want to be far away from your loved ones, but because the conditions, whether it's war or whether it's economic reasons, that you have to be separated. You have to go far away to work and send money back home, whatnot. But that's separation from loved ones, and it causes pain. And the 8th one is because of having the body and mind that we are more susceptible to miseries. So and then there are people who say, I don't like this world so much. I'm gonna, because of material that I need to rely on, and that makes me vulnerable. I don't like that, so I'm gonna see if I can transcend that and elevate my state of being. And those they cultivate and then enter the realm of form. And this form has miseries too, although in their meditative bliss, they cannot maintain it because of the condition. The meditative bliss sensations that they have, those sensations are impermanent and they are undependable, because in this world still things tend to decay, including meditative bliss. After they exhausted their merits, their meditation's abilities, they fall back down. And for those who want to fall back down, so I'm going to continue my cultivations, and they enter a very high state of existence, a very deep state of existence called Formless World. Oops, and this is wrong, sorry about that. Let me quickly change this. Okay. And miseries are caused by change because the pleasant or neutral sensations do not last. And there is fear because there is no control of their next becoming. After they exhausted their meditation's ability, they have no control of maintaining it or prevent themselves from falling. And what they do in this stage is that they suppress all their consciousness to not have feelings, because they concluded that because of feelings, because of there is consciousness, that there will be susceptibility, and so they suppress all the subconscious, all their consciousness, and so they don't feel pain or pleasure, but their neutral sensations do not last, and so eventually they have to fall down, and so that causes miseries as well. So as one dwells in a world for a long time, one becomes desensitized or unaware of reality. So the point of teaching the principle of dukkha here is to motivate us to change our ordinary perspectives on the things of this world as objects worthy of pursuit when they are actually not. So all the sensual world, the physical power, right, your wealth, your honor, your physical material possessions, they are not really worth to put so much energy into pursuing them. I'm not saying possessions are not are evil or anything. It's just that we should not put too much. We should enjoy and appreciate what we have, but we shouldn't go so far as to hurt other people or to put ourselves in an unfavorable karmically to have a worse future for ourselves in the next life. And so having awareness of the situation prompts the practitioner to turn away from this world and towards the radical non-attachment, which is nirvana. So that's the one major reasons why the Buddha teaches dukkha. So in the first dukkha is often described as the 8 miseries. The first one is birth, right? Birth is suffering. So it's interesting to note that human life starts with suffering. This is a great spiritual truth, right? There's physical pain for the mother. There's emotional pain for the father as well. And also for the infant, we are told a dramatic experience, right? All of a sudden, you are being pushed out from the mother's womb into a new world that you are not familiar with, a cold, strange world, and you're very likely to be welcomed with a slap on the bottom. Not sure any of you remember that. And then secondly, after you survive that, now you have old age to deal with. And the second factor is that old age is suffering, right? There, as one ages, there's discomfort in physical weakness. You cannot get about in a relaxed way as you used to. You cannot run as fast. You have to move very slowly and carefully to prevent a fall. So that is very restrictive and suffering in some cases. And there is also a case of lost memory, Alzheimer's disease, right? You don't remember as well. Sometimes people forget who their family members are, and that causes pain on the family. And when you have eaten, you don't remember that you have eaten, or you haven't eaten, but you think that you have eaten already, and it causes confusion for yourself, but it also causes confusion for those who take care of you. You're not as agile and flexible intellectually. You don't remember as much. You can't calculate. There's a lot of restrictions as you become old, right? So perhaps the most painful of all is that when you are old, you are dependent upon others. This is very scary because you become older. The question is like, how are you going to take care of yourself, right? If you can't move before, your mind is not as sharp, you're not physically as strong, how are you going to take care of yourself? So it's a really big, major concern. And you cannot do much for yourself, and you need constant looking after. So despite all the modern comforts and amenities, modern advances in science, many of us will experience this suffering, right? So especially as those who get to live very long, but then yet very weak, and they become a burden to the caretakers and society. So this is not fun. So in other words, the life is not very fun from that perspective. Thirdly is sickness. Sickness is suffering. There are, from minor to major, you have a toothache or you have incurable disease like cancer. So sickness is nothing pleasant at all. Not just the physical pain, but there is also helplessness, the fear, the frustration, right? The mental suffering. Medical science may sometimes be able to cure some suffering, but then there is no sign that we will ever banish this completely. After we finish with this kind of illness, another one will form, right? After we cure the last SARS issues in Asia, now we have this COVID-19 causing new disease. So this new disease is causing suffering to people who don't have strong enough immune system to help fight the virus. So this is a very true statement, and it's a very applicable even today, right? This book was written decades ago, but I mean this teaching was 3,000 years ago, and it hasn't changed much. No sooner do we get rid of one disease than another comes along, right? They're waiting in line for their turn to show up. One virus is defeated, a new, stronger strain of virus arises. This is so very true. As soon as we feel physically quite healthy, we start to develop all sorts of mental ailments, suffering, worries, anxieties. So, in other words, our lives, body is very fragile because any sense of imperfections in our lives can be developed into an illness. For example, stress can turn into a heart attack, right? Fatigue turns into syndromes, and a habit can turn into addiction. So any kind of imperfections in our life can have spiral downwards effect, and it could cause a lot of pain and suffering. So sickness may change its appearance, but it doesn't go away. It just changes form, appearance. The fourth is death is suffering. We suffer in the knowledge that our loved ones will die, and we suffer in the knowledge of our own dissolution. Like someday we will die too. We see people dying, and we feel sorry for them. We cry, we shed tears. But when we think about ourselves, it brings fear as well. So we suffer and suffering with regards to death is simply fear, right? We fear of losing our existence, fear of losing all that we have put so much an effort in building. Put up with the great deal of suffering before we choose to die. So people struggle. They struggle. It is said that it's not really the pain that causes suffering during the dying process, but it's the fear, it's the acceptance that this body, this life has to end. So before that acceptance, there is a lot of fear, and that fear is what causing a lot of suffering. So our terror of the inevitable conclusion to our own existence. So that is very fearful. So people do not always feel ready to die, right? They have their achievements, they have their estate that they are quite happy with, and they don't want to leave it behind, and that causes a great deal of suffering for them. And also some people have remorse, all the bad things that they have done, they feel sorry, they want to say sorry one more time to that person who they wronged, but they can't. And so that causes them unfinished business that is creating a lot of anxiety, remorse. And then there's also fear and apprehensions for the future of what they're going to be. So there's fear about that too. So before we go to the next one, I want to share this article here, the Atlantic, which is the Atlantic magazine, has this article. The title is "Why I Hope to Die at 75." So this is not all morbid or pessimistic, but I want to bring this to attention, but I also have a positive spin on it too. And so this author here, he says that he wants to clarify to just to make sure people understand his intention, he said, let me be clear about my wish. I'm neither asking for more time than is likely, nor for shortening my life. He's very healthy as far as his physicians, and he has medical records to show, I guess, as far as he knows. He's a very healthy man with no chronic illness. Together with his nephews, he climbed this mountain, Kilimanjaro. So I'm not talking about bargaining with God to live to 75 because I have some sort of terminal illness. No, he's a very healthy man. This is his decision. No, am I talking about waking up one morning 18 years from now and ending my life through through some side of suicide cause or euthanasia? So he says in his article, Americans seem to be obsessed with exercising, doing mental puzzles, consuming various juice and proteins and vitamins, all in an effort to cheat death and prolonging life as long as possible. I said Americans may live longer than their parents, but they are likely to be more incapacitated, right? And this doesn't sound very desirable to him. And he says that since, based on statistics, demographics, since mid-19th century, Americans have they've been living longer. In the 1900s, the life expectancy was 47 years old. 30 years later, 59.7, and about 30 years later, 75.4. So on average, there's an increase of 17% in terms of life expectancy. People are living longer. In the early part of the 20th century, he's making comparison to now, that life expectancy increased as vaccines, antibiotics, and better medical care saved children from premature death and other other infections. But once they were cured, they were able to return to their normal lives without residual disabilities. Like they could still walk, they could still talk normal after they were cured. But since 1960, increases in longevity have been achieved mainly by extending the lives of the people over 60. So rather than saving more young people, we are stretching out old age. So people are living longer, but not very healthy. Okay. So this is how it looks like. There's a picture of him. Okay. And then he goes on to say that over the past 50 years, healthcare hasn't slowed the aging process as much as it has slowed the dying process. So in other words, more people are getting old and less functional. They are not as active as before and they need more. They live longer, but they need more support to live that longer life. The good news is that we have made major strides in reducing mortality, the death rate from strokes. People who have stroke, they survive. So between 2000 and 2010, the number of deaths from stroke declined by more than 20% because of the medical advanced sciences that can help save lives. The bad news is that many of those, roughly almost 7 million Americans back then, it was I think this article was a few years ago, who have survived a stroke suffer from paralysis or inability to speak. So they have some sort of disability because they survive, but then they have some sort of disability. So that's why I say it's not very desirable to have to live a long life if you're going to be less functional. So people are living longer but less functional. So so he's making a comparison here that as you grow older, that you tend to have limitations with your ability to think and to create. On an average, the creativity, those who have bright ideas, great thinking, such as physicists, making their recoveries, the average age is 48 years old. Half of the people in the 80s and older have functional limitations. They can't walk as fast, and they can't do normal things as they used to. 1/3 of people over 85 or older have Alzheimer's disease. They cannot remember. So they need care. Right? So he said that it's not just mental slowing, but literally we're losing our creativity as we age. But there are exceptions, though. There are those, and he has a friend, economist, who was in his 80s, was very brilliant, still making major contributions, right? Still with his work, and he recently celebrated his 90th birthday. That was a few years ago. So he is an outlier. He is a rare individual. I have a note here for myself that a founder of my company was a celebrated individual who lived to 101 years old. And after he left the company, he had other creations too, but he continued to be a consultant for the company until he died. Until age 101 years old, he was still making contributions. And the board of directors valued his insight and guidance. Even at age 100 years old, he was still a valuable person. So what is meant here is that this article is just one perspective. So how do we look at it from a Buddhist perspective? When we make beneficial contributions and we add value to wherever we go, we will be loved and respected. If we only cultivate merits like giving, for example, you will have your karmic rewards. And when you need help, people will be there to help you. You will always have enough materially. Whatever you need, you will have. But if you only have karmic rewards, then you will not necessarily, without wisdom, for example, you will not necessarily have the respect. You will have help. You will have the physical, all the material needs that you want, but you may not necessarily have the respect, because there are people who are willing to help others out of pity, right, for their weakness. They think that some people are weak, therefore they help them. So in a way, they look down on them. And it is those receiving help only. This kind of help they receive help because of their karmic rewards. But if we cultivate merit, wisdom, and compassion, then those who come to us to help us will come with love and respect for us out of gratitude, right? So when we grow older, we shouldn't see these statistics as very scary, but it's teaching us something here. And it's from Buddhist perspective, we can understand that when we grow older, where we fall short physically with physical limitations, we make up for it mentally and spiritually. We can still be a valuable citizen spiritually and mentally. We can mentor, teach young people, offer or transfer knowledge to those who are new, for example. So we can still be a valuable citizen, just like one of the company's founder, 100 years old, he's on a wheelchair, but he can still make contribution. So when we are older, where we fall short physically, we make up for it mentally and spiritually, right? So don't be a statistics of becoming a disabled, long-living elderly. So we should focus, we should cultivate merits and wisdom and add value and practice compassion. And don't be a burden, but become a source of inspiration for others. Right? And do not become a burden. We should be capable mentally and physically. We should be able in order to be capable, we have to be able to offer something to others. So we should take care of our body and mind. We should eat healthy, be responsible with our health, exercise, meditate, and practice giving. Givings of three kinds: givings of wealth, giving of knowledge, and giving of fearlessness. But we shouldn't cultivate merit and wisdom out of fear, meaning that to cultivate for our own salvation, to help ourselves, right? In other words, because we fear that we're gonna be in a very bad state when we grow old, so we try to help people here so that our future can be better. No, that's not the intention here. Although beneficial, it is a selfish agenda when we do that. We should follow the Buddha's footsteps to cultivate merit and wisdom out of courage, no fear. Right? We do it because of selflessness, not because of fear for our own salvation. So with the coronavirus affecting the world right now needs help, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Right? So what can we do to help? So what can we do to help? So I'm going to open this to discussions here so you can enable your microphone, and if you have something to share, you can share with us. But while you think about it, I want to point out a couple of things here because this is so affecting of our lives. What is this novel coronavirus teaching us? What does it want to tell us? What lessons does it want to tell us? One thing here that I noticed that the virus kills anyone regardless of race, creed, religious faith. So based on this, the virus is telling us that we are fundamentally equal. Our blood is red. When we face pain, we shed tears. We shed the same salty tears. So blood represents life. Life is precious. When we are in this together, and we have the same, we are encountering the same difficulty, and we all shed tears, and tears represent suffering. When we are sharing this suffering, we are going in this together, and life is precious. And that's what the virus wants to tell us, that we are equal, and that life is precious, and that we are all in this together. So that's the first lesson that I think the virus is trying to tell us. The second lesson that the virus tries to tell us is that the virus is making people isolated, right? People have to be isolated in order to survive, to appreciate the loving kindness, compassion, and human connections. And those things are more important than material possessions. Now so that's what the virus is telling us, that before we didn't really appreciate that, but now we want to connect with people more. I was reading an article where because of this social distancing and isolations that people are spending 18 billion hours every day on WebEx, Skype meetings and things like that to connect with people. And so people connections are precious. And it's a chance for us to, because people didn't value the human connection before, and now the virus is forcing us to isolate so that we can understand that loving kindness, compassion, and human connections are precious. The third thing that perhaps the virus wants to tell us is that it's very interesting to note that the virus only attacks the lungs and the respiratory systems of the body. It doesn't impact. It does not attack your eyes, right? It does not attack your kidney. It doesn't attack your other parts of the body, unlike other viruses. But it's specifically attacking your lungs, making it very difficult to breathe. So patients die because they can't breathe on their own. And so what this is telling us is that the air around us, the environment, is very precious, and that perhaps people did not care about the environment. We polluted the environment too much. Transportations. Every day, thousands of airlines, right? Perhaps hundreds of thousands of flights. And every time an aircraft burns fuel across the skies, it releases pollutants in the air, and it destroys the environment. Every day we drive our cars, we're polluting the environment. And so it's perhaps the virus is telling us to remember to protect the environment, and maybe nature is taking its drastic action to force people to stop polluting the environment before we destroy the environment to a point of no return. So what do you think? What other things that you observe that you think the virus may be telling us? Any other comments? Any comments? Does anybody have any comments? Okay. Okay. All right. If you have other comments, you can speak up. But otherwise, these are the things that I've noticed. So hopefully, we don't look at this from a negative perspective that it's terrible that we're in this situation. But based on Buddhist perspective, it's conditionality. Things happen for a reason, and it's an opportunity to make things better by providing the right conditions. So we should be more careful about how we live our lives to avoid hurting the environment. Where we should be more appreciative of the human connections and express our love and kindness and compassion to others, right? And that to see others as equal, and that to appreciate one another. Okay. So let's go on for a little bit here on what he has to say. So there is an age-creativity relationship, meaning that as we age, our creativity declines. Because of the neural connections that are most heavily used are reinforced and retained, while those that are rarely, if ever, used atrophy, disappear over time. Okay. Okay. I'm not sure if I saw. Okay. I'll repeat. Let's let me finish this, and I'll get back to your question. P had a question: the difference between soul and consciousness that carries karma, life after life. So we passed that point, but I'll come back to that. Okay. So in other words, whatever we don't use will be depleted. So not only physically, like it is described here, where with our neurons and the brain cells, but also our compassion too. If we don't exercise our compassion, it will be depleted too. And perhaps that's what the virus is telling us, that maybe the world is not exercising enough compassion, and that is now forcing us to recognize that the human connections, loving kindness, those things are important, and not money, not physical possessions. So it is difficult, if not impossible, to generate new creative thoughts because of the depletions in the mental matters. It's more difficult for older people to learn new languages because of limitations. And it's not likely to develop strong brain connections to generate innovative ideas, except for, they call the old thinkers, they're the minority where they have superior plasticity, where they can be very creative and innovative even in their old age. So here's a graph to show productivity and age, that when we get to our 40s, our prime, we have a best chance to make contributions. But if we don't take advantage of that as we allow ourselves to age and don't exercise those abilities, then we're gonna more likely to see a decline in our contributions. So in other words, less contributions, but if we continue to live, then we become a burden to society. One university professor told the author that he has his age. He has published less frequently, but now he's contributing in other ways. So he's mentoring students, helping them translate their passions into research projects, and advising them on the balance of career and family. So in other words, mentorship is hugely important. right? Again, where we fall short physically as we age, we make up for it mentally and psychologically. Spiritually, we can make up for it spiritually. There are people who, as they grow, they become wiser. They may not be very physically active, but they are very wise that they can help people, companies, consult companies to go through difficulties, to overcome challenges, or to have new ideas to allow companies to grow. So as one gets older, one may become physically less capable, but one should become spiritually valuable through merit and wisdom cultivation. So the emphasis here, I guess, is the giving of the Dharma, or knowledge or truth. When we give knowledge, we ourselves will have intelligence, and our minds will be sharper. And that's based on the law of cause and effect. If we cultivate merits, let me zoom in so you can see. If we only cultivate merits, meaning we will have karmic rewards, meaning that we will never lack with merits, with karmic rewards, we will not lack material needs. Whatever we need, we have. But if we practice wisdom and compassion, we can add more value and we'll be surrounded by loving and caring people. So even though the statistics is telling us that as one ages, one can become less capable physically, but from a Buddhist perspective, one can change that course by giving the right conditions, cultivating merits, cultivating value, wisdoms and compassion, adding value to wherever that we go. Then we can raise ourselves, our value spiritually. Okay. All right, any comments so far? So even though there are 7 kinds of sufferings here, with birth, old age, illness, and death, that is the normal way of going through life. From a Buddhist perspective, you may have pain, but there is no suffering, because when you have awareness, when you have wisdom to recognize things and look at things from a different bright perspective, and you understand the conditions, how to make things better, there is no suffering. For example, you cut your hand, there is pain, but there is no suffering. You don't have mental suffering. You don't have anger in it. There is pain, but there is no suffering. And so when we learn Buddhism, the value of learning Buddhism is to eliminate suffering. There will be pain, but there is no suffering. Okay, fifthly is contact with one he dislikes. That is suffering. So maybe that even our own family, right? For family members arguing, they don't like to get along, but they have to live together. That is very suffering. And we have to put up with a certain amount of contact, and that can be very suffering because we're forced to do so. The work can be a source of suffering too, because we need to earn a living, and it is the only work that we can get, and so we have to put up with those who we don't like. And when we rather do something else, if we can't, but we have to do our work because we have to make a living. So that is suffering. All sorts of environmental conditions which are unpleasant, like pollution, like the coronavirus, right, is forcing us to change our lives and to avoid contact. And so it's making unpleasant changes for people. It's not possible for everyone to go off and live in the Greek villa. You can't just hide. So there's no point in hiding. There's no point in escaping. You can run, but you can't hide, as the saying goes, and that's not really important. What's more important than trying to escape is to understand the conditions of why things happen. Let me zoom in a little bit here. right? Why things happen. So when our sense organs, our eyes, our ears, when we hear something, when we see something, when we interact with the environment, those sense organs create sense consciousness. And it creates feelings, anger, happiness, and so forth, jealousy. One can either neutralize the suffering that one encounters or create more suffering. So every encounter of your sense organs and environment, you have an opportunity to either neutralize that suffering or to create more suffering for yourself in the future. So one can either start breaking the 12 links that we talked about, or to continue to reinforce the links of the cycle of life and death. So every time that we interact with people, we cause rise to feelings. If we understand, we can stop that negative feeling and we can focus on something more favorable to neutralize it. But if we face something unsatisfactory and we become angry, that anger creates fresh karma, and therefore it is very difficult to break the 12 links, the cycle of the 12 links. So it is the reactions in our thought, speech, and action that will determine whether the links are being broken or reinforced. So when we have awareness, we should cause rise to the understanding that, why am I feeling angry? Or why am I so joyful that I've forgotten the reasons and that I become arrogant, or I become complacent. So when you're too joyful, you're too comfortable, you can become complacent, and therefore you may not be progressing. Or if you are angry, then you are cultivating unskillful deeds, and that will just only reinforce the cycle of life and death. The sixth suffering is separation from one light. That is suffering. So people, they would like to live together, they want to be together, they want to meet more often, but because of circumstances that is simply not possible. For example, like time of war, right? When families are broken, or in this case, the coronavirus, people get stuck in other countries, they can't come home. They can't go back home because of physical travel restrictions. And they don't know when it's going to be. It could be weeks from now, months from now. They don't know. And so it's causing a lot of anxiety. I was reading a news article that a group of friends who traveled to, I think, South America, and they heard of the warning and they heard about the airport shutting down. But because they couldn't get all the people in the group airfares, they couldn't change all of them. So they got stuck. I guess they didn't want to leave the others behind. And so they got stuck. I'm not sure if they're back yet, but they get stuck and in a foreign country away from their family. So that can be temporary suffering. But there are people who have gone through this virus and their family members pass away. And now that is permanent separation. Okay. The seventh is to not get what one wants is suffering. So when you set your heart on something or someone and you fail to achieve your goal, there is disappointment, frustration, and even bitterness. Where we fail to get that particular job that we particularly wanted, or we fail to be selected, it can cause disappointment. So in this world, the stronger desire, the more suffering there is. So the Buddhas once declare, one thing only do I teach, suffering and cessation of suffering. So the Buddha didn't just throw out the problem, say, here, life is suffering, but he's also accompanies it with solution. So this is liberation from the bondage of suffering is indeed a keynote of his teaching. So he wants the first truth in the Four Noble Truths is suffering. And that is to make a point, is to wake us up to see that the world that we're living in is not as perfect as we think, because we have become desensitized to the reality of the world that we live in. And so he wakes us up with saying that life is suffering, and here is the solution. the cessation of that suffering. So the Buddha compares himself to a physician who attempts to relieve his patient of tormenting disease of conditioned existence. So in the disease that the Buddha is talking us about is not physical disease. So physical disease, natural disasters, those things are not great disasters. The greatest disasters from the Buddha's perspective is the continuous cycle of life and death. Life after life, death after death, right? After this life, we die and we die again and again and again. Continue to face suffering. That is the greatest disasters for sentient beings. And that's what the Buddha is trying to eliminate, is that to end that cycle of life and death. Right? The hunger, COVID-19 disease, although it's affecting millions of people, affecting the whole world, but that is not the disasters that the Buddha is talking about. The disasters that the Buddha wants to put an end to is the cycle of life and death. So on many occasions when he spoke about suffering, he tried to get people to see it in perspective, and he would sum up his discourse by saying that existing as a whole is painful, comprising of form, feeling, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness, the five aggregates, and ultimately it is unsatisfactory. So small people would say this is going a little bit too far. It's very pessimistic. Human existence can by no means be said to be unsatisfactory and painful all the way through. They will admit that birth is painful, right? Sickness is painful. Old age, they agree that it's painful, and death is also painful. But at the same time, they are reluctant to accept that conditions existence itself is suffering. So in other words, they admit that all the individual digits in the sum, but they don't accept the total to which those digits add up. So they say yes, but on the whole, it's not such a bad place. So why so negative? There's plenty to smile about. So of course, in this world, there are pleasant experiences as well as painful ones. But the Buddhist view is that even pleasant experiences are at the bottom painful, and only suffering conceal. It has only concealed suffering. So when the Buddha says life is suffering, he's not talking about at the human level, but he's talking about from the nirvana level, from the so-called absolute level, looking at the entirety of the world, not from our level, because from our level it's relative. For example, a person who does not have any money, a beggar, is very happy to receive $1 from a passerby, right? He's very happy to have $1. But to him, that receiving $1 is very happy. But compared to a person who has $1 million, that is nothing. $1 is nothing. But having $1 million is nothing compared to a person who has $1 billion. So that happiness is relative that we have. We're only happy because we appreciate what we have. But if we don't appreciate what we have, even $1 million will not be sufficient. We will still feel poor, right? If you don't appreciate what you have, no matter how much wealth in this world is given to you, you will never feel enough, right? So from the Buddhist perspective is that the word life is suffering is from the absolute point of view at the nirvana level. Okay. And then in his books, I have about 5 more minutes, but Edward Combs talks about the 4 different aspects of concealed suffering. Let me quickly go through this. Firstly, he says that pleasant for one person, it may involve suffering for other people, like those who drink, who party at the expense of, he says here, for example, enjoyment with which people eat the flesh of the slaughtered animals. They order the steak very nicely prepared. They enjoy the meals, but at the expense of other beings, right? So that's an example of there is happiness, but then if you look at the whole picture, you take a step back and look at the picture from beginning to end. That party, that meal is very happy. But if you take a step back and look at the whole process, how that party scene is generated, it is based on the suffering of, in this case, of animals who had to give up their lives, right, through force in order to satisfy the request of the customers. So that happiness is at the expense of other people, other beings. And then the second kind of concealed suffering is pleasant experience which has a flavor of anxiety, afraid of losing it. So you feel happy because you are now powerful politically or financially, but behind that there is fear of losing your wealth. Like political power, very sweet. It's a very sweet thing to exercise your power over people, but you have to always watch your back because you don't know who or when you may be backstabbed. You won't be able to sleep very easily. Okay. A third concealed suffering is something which is pleasant, but which binds us to something else that brings about suffering, like the human body. So when we are young, we enjoy our lives. We have money, we have time. We go out, we buy the things we like, nice cars, nice clothing. With this body, we enjoy it. When we put on nice clothes, we look at ourselves, we feel proud, right? When we're young, but there is a side effect as we get older. We have to, because of this body, we have to endure old age and illness and all that stuff. So through it, we experience all sorts of pleasurable sensations that make us very attached to it, but we also experience odd and pleasant sensations through it as well. So you can't have it, you can't just pick one, you gotta take it all. So our attachment provides us with the pleasant sensations that binds us also, which provides us with unpleasant sensations. So we can't have one without the other. So although, yes, there are pleasurable moments and painful ones, but overall, at the end, if you look at it, there is more unsatisfactoriness than there is satisfactoriness. And so lastly, experience of conditioned existence cannot satisfy the deepest longings of the heart. So one of which, each one of us, there is something that is unconditioned. That is not of this world. That is transcendental, whatever you call it, he says, or the Buddha nature. You recognize it, and you know that the physical world cannot satisfy that pursuit. So let me take a note here that if you're the only one with money, everyone else around it is poor and lacking, you won't feel very happy for a long time. You won't feel happy for a very long time. So money is powerful, but it cannot buy you everything, right? It cannot buy you health. There are people who are so wealthy that they can buy an entire hospital with all the staff, but they're on their deathbed and they cannot do anything about it. They cannot use the money to replace their ailments, their disease, right? There are people who are very powerful that they have big companies, enterprises, but they cannot use that money to buy loyalty of their employees. They cannot use that money to buy friendship, right? When they need help, when they are down and they need somebody to talk to, it's not very easy to be able to use that money to buy friendship and loyalty, right? And you cannot use money to buy time when one's longevity is running out, right? You'll have terminal illness. And you said that because there's history in this terminal illness that you can only live for 2 weeks. You cannot use your billions of dollars to buy additional time. When the time comes, you have to go. Right? So there are people like Paul Getty, Norton Simons. So they enjoy their economic and political powers in the early stage of their lives. But as they get older, they see more. They begin to appreciate more aesthetic joy, the arts. The joy in arts became more important to them, more joyful than the money that they had. So joy in greed, anger, and delusion there is joy in angry, right? When you're angry, you want to take your anger on somebody. There's anger in that, but then there's suffering to follow. And then there's there's a joy which is very coarse in the central heavens. And then what's better than that is meditative joy. And then what's really above that is the unconditioned, which you can't really compare. But as you can see, that as you grow spiritually, the joy is more within control. When you are moving away from materialistic, your joy based on materials, and it's more transcendental, more spiritual, joy is more reliable. Okay. So that's what it's saying here, is that there are things that when our heart's set on something so meaningful, that very transcendental, a Buddha nature, we know that nothing in this world can satisfy that pursuit, can answer that pursuit. And it's because of that it creates suffering, in the sense that there's nothing in this world that can answer that question. Okay. All right. So again, this suffering here is from the absolute perspective. Absolute perspective that the Buddha made, that the conclusion, it is not a relative one. Relative perspective cannot be seen, you cannot see things entirely. So it's this mixture of joy and suffering, and it causes confusion. We think life is we don't see it from a perspective to really appreciate what's better than this. So the point of the first truth, the first reality of dukkha, is to wake us up, telling us that there is better than what we have, and that we have to give the right conditions in order to achieve something that's better, and not to be satisfied with what we have, but to motivate us to have something better. Okay. Are there any comments, questions so far? Okay. All right, that's what I want to share with you today. All right, any other comments? Is the mic not working? Some mics are on. Okay. Oh, you know what? Let me see if I thought I enable. Okay. Oh, all right, my bad. I think I might have disabled your mics. Can you hear me? Okay, you guys should be able to unmute all. Okay, so you guys should be able to speak. Yeah, any comments, anything to add before we end? Okay. All right. So Peter, do you want to ask your questions, or you want to address it separately? I'm thinking there may be something wrong with the mic, because I'm not hearing anything from you guys. And I hope you guys can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. People are talking. Okay, I'm not sure why I cannot hear you guys. Well, Okay. Okay. Sorry, let me. Audio connection speak. Okay, I think, yeah, my phone's working fine. You know what this may be? I'm not sure because of it's connecting to this. All right, can you guys? Okay. So, yeah. Sorry about that. It's because I'm sharing. I'm projecting my screen on the monitor, and the monitor's volume is off. That's why I can't seem to hear it. Okay. Any comments before we end? Any?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, I love the theory, but and it's always good to say, practice more kindness, practice more. But it's difficult to keep it in mind, and what can we do to go to the next level? To really care for the people, because we hear 10,000 people die and say, oh wow, that's so bad, but it's difficult to feel it and to do something about it is to feel equal. Things that at the same time you said, okay, well, it's 10,000, well then the next day it's 11,000.
Right.
You can get blessing or blessing.
Right.
You don't.
Yeah. I understand the question. I think there are two ways to look at this. One way is that everybody who's infected is not dying, right? There are people whose immune system is strong enough that they can survive, and there are people whose immune system was not strong enough, so they succumb. So everybody's karma is different. And for example, just like when you see a homeless person living under the bridge, perhaps it is his karma that he has to go through this experience to be a target of charity, right? So when we see this person, we can cause rise to compassion and offer him maybe a meal or some money to help his life better. But we should not look at it and cause rise to anger and start blaming his family for not taking care of him, or anger that the government is not doing anything about it, or anger that society is unfair. Because everybody's karma, you have to go, it's their own individual karma. What we can do is to do our best. And if you look at the situations and you become emotionally burdened, then that is not effective. It's not helping you. It's not helping anybody, right? So when we look at things, we say this is the best we can do, and we try our best. But to say that we have to help 10,000 people, and there's nothing that we can do about it, and I don't think there is wisdom in that thinking. That because during the Buddha's time, he couldn't save everybody. People who have the right conditions, the right affinity, will accept, right? So perhaps we all have to go through this to learn lessons that nature is teaching us, to be more appreciative of each other, to learn how to protect the environment, and to learn how to care for one another. And sometimes we have to go through such painful experience to really learn the lessons. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, because you cannot take the whole burden of the world and put on your shoulders and say, "Oh, I'm a Buddhist now. I need to. I'm practicing compassion, and so I feel bad." That feeling bad is just emotional aspect of it. That's not wisdom. That's you're being emotional. you're feeling guilty. That's not what Buddhism is about.
No, but you have to. This is the opposite. This is you getting numb about all that. Of course, it's good to. I totally with the knowledge that okay, everybody has his own karma and all, and we're bringing things from the past life, and that's why some people succumb to the disease, and some people you don't even notice that they had the corona. Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing we can do is our best, because without the right conditions, like how can you help people who are on this side of the world? You can't, right? And if you are sick yourself, let's say you go out and you expose yourself to the virus and you're now sick, then you now become a burden. Not, no, like the hospital now has to care for you as opposed to now you one more person to that list, right? So we have to be, we should be smart about it and not become emotional, because being emotional, feeling guilty, that's not going to help. Does it make sense?
Yeah, you don't have any anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good point because it makes, yeah, I'm sad about it as well. But I try to stay positive to see what can I do. Like, you know, if we can contribute financially to organizations that can do the help and provide the help, then we should do that. And like, you know, put together this class and we can communicate virtually to share ideas that is helpful as well. And so, but we shouldn't put ourselves at risk and others at risk because we want to do something heroic. Yeah, thanks for the question. Any other comments? Okay, any observations? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I asked you guys questions, but I couldn't hear you because this new system, this new hookup, I didn't realize that all the audio is also connected to the TV, and the monitor is, the volume is off. It was off, so I couldn't hear you guys.
Also, if I may, during the presentation, some people joined after, and their mics were on all the time, so they created extra noise.
Oh, okay.
So the next step, maybe before you continue, check if the mics, his mics, all the mics are off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's why I try to mute mics, but then it's only muting on my side. I didn't realize that other people could still hear.
Yeah, you muted like 4 or 5, but then 2 more they were on.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, so people who joined later, the setting was only applicable for people who had already joined.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh no.
You could notice the difference in the sound perfectly before and after the show.
Yeah.
All this echo.
Oh yeah. You know, I would have heard that sound had my the monitor volume was on.
You wouldn't notice.
Okay.
But next time, I mean, we could hear everything.
Okay, great. All right. Anything else from anybody? Very good comments. I think it's a good way to exchange ideas. Okay. All right. If not, then let's do merit dedication. We'll continue. I have a few other points in reality. So the more we understand this, hopefully it helps to. I hope that this becomes it's helpful, and that it provides you a better perspective to make things better, right? And not to feel pessimistic or overwhelmed. Okay. All right, if you could, please join your palms. Together we recite. Oops. So we can dedicate the merits, and we will dedicate merits to those who are inflicted by this virus and their family. Okay, if you could please join your palms. Together we recite. May the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. Amida. Thank you so much for showing up. We'll talk to you next time.